Imagine it is 6 a.m.
Okay.
The room is pitch black. You haven't even had a glass of water yet. Your feet haven't touched the floor, but your hand is already like blindly reaching for that glowing rectangle on your nightstand.
Oh, yeah. We've all been there.
Right. You pull it to your face, squinting against the blue light, and you immediately start scrolling through your work inbox.
Yep. The morning ritual.
It is. And I just have to ask, why do we do this? Why do we invite our bosses, our clients, our most stressful obligations into our bedrooms before we're even fully conscious?
I mean, it is a really profound behavioral quirk of the modern era. We act as if our immediate awareness of an email is the only thing standing between the company we work for and total catastrophic ruin.
Like the whole place will burn down if we don't look.
Exactly. But really, if you look closely, it's a trauma response.
Wait, really? A trauma response?
Yeah, it's this hyper-vigilant state driven by an environment that just constantly demands more of us.
Wow. And that brings us to, our dedicated learner listening right now, because whether you are prepping for a high-stakes management meeting or trying to catch up on the latest in organizational psychology, or you're just insanely curious about human behavior, you almost certainly grapple with this exact phenomenon.
The compulsion to always be on.
Yes, exactly. And today, we are looking at a really fascinating piece of source material. It's a transcript from an audio program called Advanced Zone.
Right, hosted by Emma and John.
Yeah, these two educators. And the stated purpose of their show is to help global listeners take their English from fluent to absolutely masterful, specifically focusing on C2 level advanced English listening practice.
Which, if you were just looking at the cover, sounds like a very straightforward utilitarian educational resource.
Yeah, just grammar and vocab.
Right. You tune in to expand your vocabulary, perhaps refine your phrasing for a corporate environment so you sound a bit more polished in your next quarterly review.
But the mission for our deep dive today is entirely different. We are looking right past the literal grammar lessons.
Way past them.
Because in this specific transcript, Emma and John use a discussion on work-life balance as the vehicle to teach these advanced vocabulary words. And in doing so, they provide one of the most profound diagnostic blueprints of modern burnout I have ever seen.
It really is incredible how deep they go.
It is. We are dissecting the exact specific language we all use to justify our own exhaustion. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, the transcript opens with this highly relatable anecdote that just instantly establishes the emotional stakes of the conversation.
Oh, John's day off.
Yes. Emma welcomes the audience and then immediately turns to her co-host, John, and congratulates him because, rumor has it, he actually took a day off the previous Friday.
A rare occurrence, apparently.
Right. And she asks him how he capitalized on it. Did he decompress? Did he retreat somewhere scenic?
And John's response is just a masterclass in modern self-deception.
It totally is.
Because he claims he had a full 24 hours dedicated entirely to his own well-being. But then he lists his actual itinerary.
Oh, it's painful to read.
Listen to this so-called day off, okay? He did a deep clean to eradicate clutter in his apartment. Then he tackled a mountain of laundry.
Sounds super relaxing so far.
Right. Following that, he ran a myriad of errands, the bank, the supermarket, the post office, and then the absolute ultimate betrayal of the day off.
The emails.
He cleared out what he calls a minor backlog of work emails.
I mean, Emma immediately calls him out, and rightfully so. She points out that what John experienced was fundamentally not a day off.
Not even close.
He didn't rest. He merely pivoted. He shifted his energy from corporate labor to domestic and administrative labor.
Yeah, she tells him you expended more energy on your day off than the average person does during a grueling shift at the office.
Which is so true.
But, I found myself actually getting defensive on John's behalf when I read that.
Really? How so?
Because aren't chores just a necessary evil? I mean, we all have to buy groceries. We all have to do laundry.
Right, the basics of survival.
Yeah. If you work 5 days a week, when else are you supposed to go to the post office? It feels like Emma is punishing him for just trying to survive his own life.
Well, the insight here isn't that John shouldn't buy groceries. The insight is the categorization of that time.
The categorization.
Exactly. John categorized a day of intense logistical and physical labor as his quote-unquote time off.
Ah, I see.
He tricked his brain into thinking he was resting simply because he wasn't physically sitting at his office desk.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
But the psychology of his defense is where the real meat of this issue lies. Because John defends himself by asking, is productivity a crime? I got a lot accomplished.
Classic overachiever response.
Right. And when Emma pushes him, he explicitly names the psychological driver behind his behavior. He says he feels an underlying guilt and a sense of idle complacency when he isn't actively achieving something.
Idle complacency.
Yeah. He confesses that resting makes him feel like he is squandering his time.
Man, idle complacency. That is an incredibly loaded pairing of words.
It really is. Let's look at the history of that phrasing, actually. The word idle, historically, particularly in agrarian societies, just meant not working or at rest.
Like a field lying fallow or whatever.
Exactly. It was a completely neutral state. But with the Industrial Revolution and the rise of clock-oriented time, we culturally weaponized the concept of idleness.
Oh, we definitely did.
We turned it into a synonym for lazy, worthless, or this lacking purpose. And then you add complacency onto that.
Right.
Complacency suggests a dangerous smugness, a vulnerability to being overtaken by competitors.
Yeah, if you are complacent, you're going to be eaten by the lion or, in modern terms, passed over for the promotion.
Precisely. John is terrified that if he stops moving, if he stops producing, whether that's a corporate report or like a sanitized kitchen, he is fundamentally failing.
It sounds exhausting.
The neurobiology of this is fascinating, actually. When we tie our self-worth entirely to output, the brain's reward center, the striatum, becomes conditioned to only release dopamine upon the completion of a task.
Wait, really? So you literally need to finish something to feel good?
Yes. The feeling of squandering time becomes literally abhorrent to the nervous system, forcing us into these absurd performative acts of productivity, even on the one day designated for rest.
Okay, I have an analogy for this. Taking a day off from your corporate job just to do intense domestic labor and life admin, it's like transferring debt from one high-interest credit card to another and then calling yourself financially free.
Oh, that is a great way to put it.
Right, you haven't paid anything off.
And you are still accumulating interest. The cognitive debt mechanism remains entirely active. Your brain and your body are still accumulating wear and tear.
You're just wearing out different parts.
Exactly. You are still spending executive function. Every time John navigates the grocery store aisle, comparing the prices of laundry detergent, calculating how much time he has before the post office closes, he is burning through glucose in his prefrontal cortex.
Just burning it up.
He is making decisions, navigating crowds, managing timelines. It's work.
So if we are constantly transferring this cognitive debt back and forth, it means we have a fundamental misunderstanding of what a balanced life actually looks like.
Absolutely.
Like, how do we even define equilibrium if both sides of the scale are just different flavors of exhaustion?
Well, the source transcript uses John's chaotic day off to pivot directly into a linguistic analysis of the word balance.
Okay.
John notes that when people hear work-life balance, they envision a rigid, mathematically symmetrical 50-50 split between career and leisure.
A perfectly calibrated scale. 50% of your energy goes to the left, 50% goes to the right. Right. Which, sounds lovely in a utopian fantasy. But in reality, it's a total trap. The source argues adamantly against this traditional view. John calls it a profound misconception.
Because it is.
Yeah. The alternative they present is that balance isn't static. It is highly fluid. It requires intense rigor during some weeks and allows for profound leniency in others.
The critical shift in the text here is moving away from the pursuit of mathematical parity and moving toward the pursuit of autonomy.
Parity versus autonomy.
Parity implies that for every hour you work, you must have an hour of leisure. That sets us up for constant failure and guilt because the math of human existence simply doesn't support it.
It's impossible.
Exactly. You cannot split a brain 50-50 without incurring a massive cognitive cost from constant context switching.
Yeah, the text defines balance not as equal time, but as ensuring your career doesn't encroach on every single facet of your existence.
That word encroach is so important there.
It is. It defines it as retaining the bandwidth for relationships, for intellectual pursuits, and for simple acts like cooking a meal without simultaneously taking a conference call.
Yes.
The phrase they use is keeping the plate spinning or juggling competing demands. You have your career plate, your family obligations plate, your personal growth plate, and you're trying to keep them all in the air.
What's fascinating here is that the source explicitly acknowledges that every functioning adult is engaged in this juggling act. It normalizes the struggle.
Which is so refreshing.
Right. The goal isn't to hold all the plates perfectly still. The goal is having the autonomy to decide how much energy to give each plate at any given moment, depending on the fluidity of your week.
I have to say, I really struggle with that spinning plates metaphor.
Yeah. Why is that?
Doesn't the very idea of spinning plates inherently sound exhausting? I mean, it implies constant frantic motion. A juggler can never look away, not even for a microsecond, or a plate shatters.
That's a very fair point.
I don't want to be a juggler. Maybe true autonomy isn't about becoming a better, faster, more optimized plate spinner. Maybe true autonomy is deciding which plates we are perfectly fine with letting hit the floor.
Oh, wow. That is a profound reframing, and it speaks to the core difference between parity and autonomy.
Right.
Because if you are frantically spinning every plate because corporate culture told you they are all equally vital, you have no autonomy. You are a victim of momentum.
Just reacting to everything.
True autonomy, as the text suggests, is having the bandwidth to step back and evaluate the plates. It's having the agency to say, the inbox 0 plate can drop today because the family dinner plate needs my full psychological attention.
But we don't let them drop. We try to spin them all.
We really do.
And if we fail to recognize this need for autonomy, if we try to force that perfect 50-50 parity while spinning a dozen plates, the source points out that we eventually hit a crisis point. Our cognitive load becomes too immense.
Which brings us back to that 6 a.m. scenario you described at the very beginning.
Oh, right. The morning phone grab.
Emma asks a crucial question in the text. What are the actual tangible symptoms of a severely skewed balance? Because she notes that many people are completely oblivious to the fact that they are teetering on the edge.
They think they're just busy.
Right, just busy. And John provides that prime example, compulsively refreshing your inbox before your feet have hit the floor.
Such a classic red flag.
Emma admits to doing this in the transcript, actually, but she offers a rationalization. She claims she only checks her emails in bed to ensure no catastrophic crises materialized overnight.
And John's response is the voice of absolute reason here. He tells her, Emma, no catastrophic corporate crises materialize at 6 a.m.
Let's analyze the neurobiology of this hyper-vigilant state for a second. Emma says, what if my superiors forwarded something highly time-sensitive?
Yeah, what if?
This highlights how we invent fictional stakes. The human brain, specifically the amygdala, evolved to scan the environment for physical threats, predators, hostile tribes.
Real danger.
Exactly. But in the modern office worker, the amygdala has essentially mapped those survival instincts onto the corporate inbox.
The brain can't tell the difference between a hungry tiger and an email from the VP of marketing.
It genuinely cannot. When Emma reads an urgent message at 6 a.m., her amygdala fires, signaling the adrenal glands to flood her system with cortisol and adrenaline because her body literally thinks she needs to prepare to fight or run for her life.
That is wild.
She is initiating a massive physiological stress response while she is still lying under the covers.
It's like checking the refrigerator over and over, hoping new, exciting food has magically appeared, but instead, it's just fresh stress.
Oh, that's a brilliant way to phrase it.
You open the inbox, and best case scenario, there's nothing, but you still spike your heart rate waiting for it to load. Worst case scenario, there's a problem that you now have to ruminate on while you're trying to brush your teeth. You've essentially invited your boss into your bedroom at dawn.
It's a defense mechanism mixed with, honestly, an inflated sense of ego.
Ego. How so?
Well, if we believe we are indispensable, we feel secure in our employment. By checking the email at 6 a.m., Emma is trying to gain an illusion of control over an uncontrollable workload.
Ah, I get it.
If she knows the crisis exists, she feels she has a head start. But biologically, she is just eroding her baseline resilience.
And this inability to disconnect in the morning inevitably bleeds into the rest of the day, which leads to the second major red flag highlighted in the text, the creation of a dangerous psychological split in our social lives.
John brings up a scenario that illustrates this perfectly. He asks if Emma has ever been at a social gathering, ostensibly engaged in conversation, but her mind is entirely tethered to the office.
Emma validates this completely. She describes a situation where a friend is confiding in her about something personal.
Right.
Emma is nodding sympathetically, making all the right facial expressions, physically sitting across the table. But her internal monologue is panicking about a looming deadline. She is physically present, but psychologically absent.
This concept of psychological absence is critical. The source examines how spatial boundaries have been entirely obliterated.
Totally wiped out.
Emma points out that 2 decades ago, when you vacated the premises, when you literally walked out of the physical office building, your workday concluded. The geography dictated the boundary.
The factory whistle blew, you left the physical files on the physical desk, and you went home. You couldn't work even if you wanted to.
But now, as John says, your office resides in your pocket.
And because it's in your pocket, your manager can easily shoot you a message at 10 p.m. on a Tuesday.
This raises an important question, one that the source text really grapples with. How do we sever the digital umbilical cord when the physical boundaries of work have vanished?
That's the million-dollar question.
Emma explicitly says that while logically you are not obligated to respond at 10 p.m., corporate culture intrinsically implies otherwise.
Digital umbilical cord is such a visceral phrase. I mean, an umbilical cord provides lifeblood. It's a lifeline for a fetus. By using that term, the source highlights how deeply dependent we have become on this connection.
We really had.
We feel like if we cut it, our careers might suffocate. But I have to play devil's advocate here regarding that intrinsic pressure.
Okay, go for it.
Is it really the manager's fault for sending a message at 10 p.m.? Maybe they just put their kids to bed and that's their only quiet time to catch up on asynchronous work. Is it their fault or is it our fault for looking at our phone when we should be asleep?
That is the nexus of the entire debate right there. It is a symbiotic dysfunction.
Symbiotic dysfunction, I like that.
Yes. The manager is utilizing asynchronous communication, perhaps without malicious intent, but the receiver is, we are complicit because we haven't enforced our own parameters.
We pick up the phone.
We choose to pick up the device. We choose to read the notification. And when we do that at dinner with a friend, we are committing the ultimate betrayal of the present moment.
So if we know that answering a 10 p.m. email ruins our sleep, spikes our cortisol, and hurts our relationships, why do we do it? What is the actual mechanism in the brain that makes us break our own rules?
The transcript transitions directly into this by discussing the anatomy of boundary dissolution. Emma brings up the necessity of delineating boundaries.
Setting those hard lines.
Exactly. And the text defines boundaries not as vague intentions, but as non-negotiable parameters established to ring-fence your time and psychological energy.
Ring fencing. Building a fortress around your brain. John gives a concrete example, right? Stating explicitly, I am unreachable via corporate channels after 7 p.m. That is a definitive line.
But as Emma rightfully points out, boundaries require immense, continuous discipline to enforce. Because the dissolution of a boundary is rarely a dramatic, intentional explosion.
It's sneaky.
It is highly insidious.
It's the whisper. Emma describes that insidious little voice whispering, just glance at one email, just one.
And that is the exact mechanism of the breakdown.
Yeah.
John maps out the step-by-step spiral. He says, one email spirals into 5. Always.
And then the rationalization kicks in. You tell yourself, well, since I'm already looking at this, I might as well finalize this quarterly report.
You rationalize that you are doing your future self a favor. Tomorrow, me is going to be so happy I did this tonight.
Which introduces the psychological concept of cognitive dissonance. You have set a rule for yourself, I stop at 7, but your behavior is violating that rule.
Right, the conflict.
To resolve the psychological discomfort of breaking your own promise, your brain rationalizes the behavior by framing the violation as a virtue. You rebrand your lack of discipline as getting a head start.
Wow. We are so good at lying to ourselves.
But it's a physiological lie. Tomorrow will just bring its own novel volume of tasks. You haven't lessened the load. You have simply extended the duration of your stress.
Boundaries aren't brick walls. They're sandbags in a flood. If you move just one single sandbag to let one email through, the water finds the gap, the pressure builds instantly, and suddenly the entire town goes under.
That analogy of the flood aligns perfectly with the C2 vocabulary word Emma introduces next: inundated. Inundated.
She tells John that when boundaries dissolve, you become completely inundated. To be inundated or swamped means you are submerged under an unmanageable volume of tasks.
When the floodwaters rise like that, and the cognitive load becomes too immense for too long, we enter a state of severe physiological decline. We move beyond just being busy, and we hit chronic fatigue.
John notes that when you are perpetually inundated, you inevitably become depleted. And he draws a very sharp distinction here, one that is vital for understanding the mechanics of burnout.
What's the distinction?
He says it is not mere drowsiness. Drowsiness is a temporary state of sleepiness. Chronic fatigue, as John describes it, is a profound systemic exhaustion.
Systemic, like the whole body.
You are essentially running on fumes. Your entire physiological and cognitive infrastructure is compromised.
And the symptom of this systemic exhaustion is fascinating. Emma points out that when you are depleted, even trivial tasks seem insurmountable. Making dinner feels like a Herculean effort.
Oh, yeah, the dinner debate.
And then John brings up an example that I think is the defining mundane tragedy of our modern era. the streaming service.
It is a brilliantly relatable metric for exhaustion.
Here's where it gets really interesting. John talks about staring blankly at a streaming service menu for 20 minutes, paralyzed, because his brain is completely fried. Selecting a film to watch feels too cognitively demanding.
This perfectly illustrates the intersection of decision fatigue and executive dysfunction. The prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain responsible for executive function. The mental skills that include working memory, flexible thinking, evaluating consequences, and making choices.
Okay.
Every single decision you make during the day, from answering an email to choosing a font for a presentation, draws from the same metabolic pool of glucose in the prefrontal cortex.
So it's not a limitless well, it's a battery.
Exactly. And when you are systemically exhausted, that battery is empty. In a normal state, having thousands of movies to choose from is a luxury.
Sure, it's fun.
You evaluate genres, you consider actors, you assess your current mood, and you make a selection. But that process requires executive function.
So when you can't pick a movie to watch, it's not because the streaming service has a terrible user interface. It's because your brain's battery is literally at 1% and the screen is dimming.
Precisely.
It takes actual metabolic energy to weigh the pros and cons of a comedy versus a documentary. And you have zero energy left to spend because you spent it all managing the inundation of your boundaries collapsing.
So instead of making a choice, you enter a state of paralysis. You stare at the screen. You are desperately seeking rest, but the very act of choosing how to rest has become an insurmountable labor. It is the paradox of choice compounded by severe cognitive depletion.
If systemic exhaustion is that painful, if staring blankly at a screen is that miserable, why do we actively resist curing it? Why do we fight rest so hard?
That's a great question.
The answer, according to the source transcript, lies in our societal conditioning. It brings us to the clash between modern hustle culture and the fundamental biology of the human body.
This is a pivotal moment in the text. Emma and John contrast two distinct sets of vocabulary to illustrate this clash. On one hand, Emma brings up the concepts of coasting or shirking responsibilities.
Wait, shirking? That's a really heavy, judgmental word.
It is heavily loaded with moral judgment. The text defines these terms as evading your duties, operating with minimal effort, or mentally checking out.
Basically being a bad employee.
Exactly. On the other hand, they discuss being frazzled or on edge, which is defined as being tense, irritable, and showing the physiological effects of extreme strain.
Emma asks a rhetorical question that cuts right to the heart of the matter. Why is genuine rest so fraught with guilt? And she answers it by pointing to modern hustle culture.
The hustle culture, yes.
She says that we have been conditioned to view leisure as a squandered opportunity. She says, if I'm lounging on the sofa, my internal critic berates me for not being productive.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see the internalization of hustle culture at its most toxic. We have been socially programmed to view rest as a moral failing.
A moral failing. That's so intense.
It is. The word shirking implies you are cheating the system, that you are a burden on your colleagues. We are so terrified of being labeled as someone who coasts that we swing the pendulum entirely to the other extreme, pushing ourselves until we become completely frazzled.
John points out the absurdity of this mindset by grounding it in biology. He says recalibrating your nervous system is productive. Rest is a biological necessity, not a moral failing.
And he provides a stark example of what happens when we ignore our biology. He mentions a time he was entirely on edge and his threshold for frustration had plummeted.
Oh, the colleague story.
Yeah, a colleague asked him a rudimentary question, and John admits he had to suppress a remarkably hostile response.
We've all been there. Someone asks, hey, where do we keep the printer paper? And you feel this volcanic urge to just scream at them.
Totally.
But the text frames that brilliantly. Emma says that is your physiological warning system screaming at you to step back. It's not that you're suddenly a terrible person. It's your biology sounding a blaring alarm.
The irritability is a symptom of a nervous system that is trapped in a sympathetic state. The autonomic nervous system has two main branches, the sympathetic, which drives the fight-or-flight response, and the parasympathetic, which drives rest and digest.
Okay, sympathetic is stress, parasympathetic is rest.
Correct. Because John hasn't unplugged, his sympathetic nervous system is perpetually engaged. His brain perceives every new input, even an innocent question about printer paper, as an additional threat to his already overwhelmed survival resources.
We treat our smart devices so much better than our own bodies. Think about it.
We really do.
We rush to plug our phones into the wall the literal second the battery icon turns red and hits 20%. It becomes an absolute emergency to find a charger. But we let our own biological batteries die completely, hit absolute zero, and then we actively berate ourselves for needing a recharge. We call ourselves lazy for needing the human equivalent of a power outlet.
It is a staggering contradiction. We deeply respect the mechanical limits of our machines, but we completely deny the biological limits of our own bodies.
Having diagnosed this illness, the exhaustion, the boundary dissolution, the biological reality of our limits, the source material, thankfully, doesn't just leave us despairing in the dark.
Thankfully.
Emma and John pivot to specific, sophisticated mitigation strategies. They outline how we can actually reclaim our autonomy.
The final section of the transcript outlines 4 distinct practical tactics for recovery. The first is what John calls implementing a strict log-off protocol.
A log-off protocol.
He talks about actually shutting the laptop down and definitively concluding the workday. And Emma agrees. She says she disengages at 6 p.m. irrespective of pending tasks.
That irrespective of pending tasks is the part that terrifies people.
It does, but it is the crucial component. A boundary is only a boundary if it holds when it's tested. There will always be pending tasks.
True. The inbox is never truly empty for long.
Exactly. If you wait until everything is finished to log off, you will never log off because the nature of knowledge work is infinite. The log-off protocol forces a definitive psychological cutoff point. It artificially creates that factory whistle we lost 2 decades ago.
The second tactic is a warning against what they call deferring downtime. Emma says a major pitfall is that people perpetually defer their rest. They think, I'll take a vacation next quarter. I just need to get through this project.
And John's rebuttal is chillingly accurate. He says, next quarter never materializes because the corporate machine never halts. If you keep deferring your rest, you're on a fast track to burnout.
It's a mirage in the desert. You keep walking toward the oasis of next quarter, but the closer you get, the further it recedes.
Beautiful analogy.
The work never stops, so the rest never comes. You have to take the rest in the present moment, even if the timing is inconvenient. Which leads to their third strategy, momentary respites. Emma suggests stepping away from the screen for just 5 minutes throughout the day to recalibrate.
Yes, micro breaks.
But I genuinely question the efficacy of these smaller measures. If my prefrontal cortex is totally depleted and my cortisol is through the roof, are momentary respites of 5 minutes actually enough to recalibrate my nervous system?
That's a fair question.
Or is that just a tiny Band-Aid on a massive bleeding wound? If I am drowning in an unmanageable volume of tasks, does staring at a wall for 5 minutes really save me?
It's a highly valid critique, but we have to view momentary respites not as the cure for chronic fatigue, but as preventative maintenance. They are meant to disrupt the accumulation of stress.
Preventative, okay.
If you work for 8 hours straight, your cognitive load and cortisol levels compound exponentially. A 5-minute respite breaks the compounding cycle.
So it interrupts the spike.
Yes. By stepping away, looking out a window which forces your eyes to adjust to a different focal length, relaxing the ciliary muscles and taking a few deep breaths, you activate the vagus nerve.
The vagus nerve.
This engages the parasympathetic nervous system, briefly halting the continuous release of cortisol. It's a micro-intervention that prevents the battery from draining quite as fast.
Okay, that makes sense. It stops the snowball from rolling down the hill and becoming an avalanche. But for true systemic recovery, the source recommends a fourth, macro-level strategy, cultivating pursuits entirely divorced from the profession.
This is perhaps the most profound strategy they offer. Emma reveals that she has taken up amateur botany, and she explains the logic behind it perfectly. It requires her full attention, and it leaves absolutely zero cognitive space for workplace anxieties.
I marvel at that specific example. Botany. You are dealing with dirt, water, and living organisms that operate on a completely different timescale than a corporate office.
Entirely different.
You cannot force a plant to grow faster by hustling it. You can't scream at a fern to optimize its photosynthesis. It naturally forces the practitioner to adopt a slower, unoptimizable pace.
And John mentions his pursuit is a brisk evening walk. He seeks solitude, ambient noise, and letting his nervous system deregulate. What's vital about both botany and walking is that they are analog physical experiences.
No screens allowed.
Right. They do not involve screens, they do not involve metrics of success, and they require a sensory engagement that forcefully pulls the mind out of the abstract anxieties of the digital workplace.
They engage the physical senses so heavily that the mental worries are crowded out.
Exactly. When you are feeling the texture of the soil or listening to the rhythm of your footsteps, you activate the brain's default mode network in a healthy way, allowing the executive function to finally rest.
So what does this all mean? We've navigated through the productivity trap, the illusion of John's chore-filled day off, the neurobiology of the 6 a.m. inbox check, the dissolution of our sandbag boundaries, and the biological necessity of rest.
We've covered a lot of ground.
If we bring this deep dive full circle, we arrive back at the source's concluding philosophy.
As Emma summarizes in the text, balance isn't about achieving flawless mathematical perfection. It's about granting yourself the grace to step back and prioritize your own humanity.
John echoes this perfectly. He reminds us that your career is a facet of your life, not the entirety of it.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to you, our listener. As you navigate your own competing demands, remember the power of unplugging.
It's vital.
Remember the necessity of delineating those non-negotiable parameters, not as a punishment to your ambition, but as a preservation of your bandwidth. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us to become better informed.
The language of burnout is ubiquitous, but so is the language of recovery, if we choose to deploy it.
And I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over. We've talked extensively about how modern culture forces us to be relentlessly professional about our jobs. But if our careers are truly just one facet of our lives, what would happen if we started treating our rest and our divorce pursuits, like our evening walks or amateur botany, with the exact same level of strict, non-negotiable professionalism and boundary setting that we give to our corporate employers?
That is a fascinating idea.
Imagine if we treated a Friday night dinner with a friend with the same life or death urgency and strict scheduling as a quarterly report. Treat your rest like it's your job, because ultimately your life depends on it.